What's up everybody, Adrian here. Welcome back to another video, and this one is going to be very interesting and unique. It kind of has to do with the new Halloween movie that's coming out, and it all started with like some comments that David Gordon Green, who is the director, and Danny McBride, who's the co-screenplay writer, had said in an article that I made a entire video about, so definitely check that out. But based on their comments, I had an epiphany, a realization that's been blowing my mind for a past week now since the article came out. And I realized that the new Halloween movie that's coming out is not meant for the prior generation of fans. It's made for a new generation of fans. And then I realized, wait a minute, but all the movies that are coming out now that the older fan base has problems with, the reason they have problems with is because it's not meant for them. It's meant for a newer, younger generation that Hollywood is trying to attract. And because of that younger, newer fan base, they have different tastes. And that's why the older generation is not really liking what the newer movies are about. So let's just get right into it. Hopefully I can explain what's going on. And once you get it, it's going to blow your mind too. So basically in the article, the director was asked, David Gordon Green was asked, so why are you naming your movie Halloween but has the same title as the original movie Halloween? Can't you come up with a better title? A newer title? And then his response was basically, because I don't want to confuse the new fans. So okay, he's catering to the new generation of fans. He doesn't want to confuse them with the older 1978 Halloween. Okay, so let's see what else he said. So then Danny McBride was in an interview and he commented and he said, I hope we don't ruin too many childhoods with this movie. That's when the hairs at the back of my neck started standing up, and I was like, wait a minute. Why is he saying that? What is he putting in this movie that would cause childhoods to be ruined? And then that's when I had the epiphany. I said to myself, wait a minute. What childhoods is he talking about? He's not talking about the newer, younger fan base generation. He's talking about the older childhood generation. He's talking about us, or our parents' generation. So I'm like, this movie, so basically the epiphany was this. This new movie is not meant for our generation. It's meant for the newer, younger generation. And then I found another article with a statement that proved my suspicions were correct. So he went on to say that the director wanted to reshoot the original ending to Halloween. But John Carpenter said, please don't touch it, leave it alone. And the reason David Gordon Green wanted to do that was to get the new fans caught up. You see what I'm saying? So he was worried, David Gordon Green was worried that the younger, newer fan base generation was going to be confused and was like, well, who is Dr. Loomis? Who is this bald guy, this old man? And wait, he shot Michael Myers and he fell off a balcony? And wait a minute, he didn't die after getting shot 6 times? I shot him 6 times! And he got up and he was gone? What's going on? So David Gordon Green wanted to reshoot all that to make the younger fans, make them understand what's going on. And John Carpenter was like, please don't touch it, leave it alone. And David Gordon Green was like, okay, fine, whatever. So we suspect, but who knows? There could be some extra footage, non-shot, that they're keeping hush hush on the Blu-ray extras or alternate version that might have this exact, like, reshooting, okay? So I'm going to show you in this video the different generations in the movies that were made specifically targeting the younger and younger and younger generation. And then you'll understand why I'm kind of worried about the new Halloween that has to do with undertones of like this social justice warrior feminism, forced diversity, multiculturalism, like, you know, millennial social commentary type undertones. But then I realized that's what this movie is made to target, the younger generation that wants all that. It's not meant for the older generation. Now do you understand? Let's continue the video. Okay, so we're gonna take a quick look, as simple as possible, of the generations that existed throughout like the century. And it's not when you were born in the generation, because you were only babies and you're not experiencing the culture of that generation in the moment, the social culture. So it's when you came of age, like when you were like a kid or a young adult or a teenager, that's when you're considered part of that generation. So just keep that in mind and let's begin. So you got the Lost Generation from 1883 to 1900. They came of age during World War One. So all the teenagers that basically, or young adults that fought in World War One. Then that generation gave birth to the GI generation, 1900 to 1936, came of age during World War II, also known as the greatest generation because they won the war, and then after that everything was going so great. So then they gave birth to the silent generation, 1936 to 1945. So this is the careers over activism. So they were getting to activism after the war. They felt it was dangerous to speak out. They are noted as for forming the leadership of the civil rights movement, as well as comprising the silent majority, aka the lucky few. They were born during the Great Depression and World War One. Remember, they were born, they were babies during that, but they didn't grow up yet until later, and they moved into adulthood during the relatively prosperous 1950s and early 1960s. You see what I'm trying to say? So they were born in the bad part of that generation, but then they grew up in the 50s after the war when everything was going great. All right? So that's when you got into the civil rights movement and the silent majority and, you know, women's lib and all that. So, okay, but that was very early. So now they gave birth to the dun-dun-dun baby boomers generation, 1946 to 1960. Now, the reason this is a different color than everything else is because this is also known as the shockwave generation. This is where everything changed. And the children of the generation after that got worse and worse, or like weaker minded or wimpier, pussier, like throughout the generations after that. So let me explain, okay? So the baby boomers are basically the rejection or redefinition of traditional values. So they were like the rebels, okay? Because all the younger kids that grew up in the 1950s and early 60s are now adults, and they've given birth to the kids that are gonna like turn into young adults into the 60s and this and that. So they were like the rebels, basically, the early rebels. and they're rejecting the traditional values, but they had a lot of privilege. Okay, they were the wealthiest, most active, most physically fit generation. Increased consumerism. They were like, buying everything, buy. Consumerism. Think of them, they thought of themselves as a special generation. They thought they were the best. In the 1960s, as the relatively large numbers of young people became teenagers and young adults, they created a very special, specific rhetoric that had an important impact in the self perception, aka the shockwave. So they really thought who they were, okay? Because, this was like the heat of the 60s, and they were like, you know, just passing that, really. So, but they were like considered to themselves the greatest, the best, the richest generation, okay? So then they gave birth to Generation X between 1961 and 1980. So look what happened here, okay? The Generation X came of age during a time of shifting societal values, and as children were sometimes called the lackey generation due to reduced adult supervision as children. So increasing divorce rates and increased maternal participation in the workforce. So the moms were leaving home and they're going to work, leaving the kids alone. And prior to child care options outside the home. So the moms were going to work, leaving the kids home alone, and they weren't hiring babysitters. Like some were, but mostly they were just leaving the kids home alone. So dad was working, mom was working, leaving the kids home alone. Not really having like that nurturing parent around like the baby boomers. So they were kind of like lackeys alone, on their own. So what they would do is just stay home and watch TV. So the TV was the babysitter. They were growing up in front of the TV. They were dubbed the MTV generation because they grew up in the 90s and were characterized as slackers, cynical, and disaffectionates because mommy wasn't home to hug them and kiss them. So cultural influences were the musical generation. A generation of punk music, heavy metal, grunge, Nirvana, hip-hop, rap. Early, genesis of that. Heavy metal music, grunge, I said that. And independent films. So you see what I'm saying? You got the baby boomers where, like, the 60s, the end of that, and then all of a sudden giving birth to these kids who were forced to stay home alone, watching MTV. They were lackeys, had to, take care of themselves, watching punk and grunge and heavy metal and rap. So then that generation gave birth to the Generation Y, the millennials, 1981 to 1995. So now are often the children of the baby boomers and have smaller families. So smaller families and familiar with communications and media. This is when like the computers and computer games are really starting to kick off and stuff like that. You had Nintendo in I think 85 or something like that. A little bit like I think 81 did Nintendo come out. Game Boy, stuff like that. So media and communications and digital technology, computer games and stuff like that. And they grew up during the Great Recession, had a major impact on them because of historically high unemployment among young people and had led to long-term economic and social damage to this generation. The video game generation. And I'm sure you heard the millennials, they're like, oh, they're still living at home in their mom's basement at 30. So that's where they're getting it from because apparently like this, the Great Recession, I guess you could blame it on that, why they're not getting jobs. But also, they were like, you know, the Generation X was spilling over. Remember the Generation X where they were left home alone, mommy at work, in front of the TV, and this spilled over to the millennials, and you're like incorporating that with the Great Recession, not having a job, and they became more and more lazy, more and more wanting to stay at home in front of the TV. But instead of MTV, you had computer games and video games and living in your mom's basement, like very antisocial, stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? It all started from the baby boomers, got more and more messed up throughout the generations. And finally, Generation Z, or Centennials, I guess it's called, 1995 to now. So these kids or young adults are basically like early 20s right now. Okay? Early 20s on. So they're very happy because they have used the internet. So they're the internet generation, the social media internet generation. So they used it since a young age, and they are generally comfortable with technology and with interacting on social media, but not so great at interacting face to face. But texting each other, great. And also because the social commentary. So this generation is having to do with like liberalism, social justice warriors, feminism, the snowflakes, the censorship, the media having a lot to do with that, and Hollywood pushing a certain type of movies, and multiculturalism and diversity, and the Me Too movement and feminism, the pink hair feminists, and the strong woman and the weak man, and everything being viral on the internet. You gotta do a video that's viral, or vines, 7-second vines, very low attention span. You got again the video games, but online, and the what's that new video game, Fortnite and all that. So again, the snowflake generation, and like super weak. But if you noticed, ever since the baby boomers, it got the children of the generation got weaker and weaker and more antisocial, and but you also got more you got better technology, but then you got the media and Hollywood pushing a stronger narrative and stuff like that. So now that you know all the generations and the type of people in the generations, and this is not an exact science, so cut me some slack. This is a general, broad overview, but still, it does have some truths in it, But take it with a grain of salt. I'm just giving you an idea. So now let's take a look at the movies for each of these generations, and you'll see that what I'm saying is kind of true. Okay, so let's take an example of the Star Wars franchise throughout the generations. So, for example, you got the baby boomers, which are kind of like your grandparents or maybe parents. Generation X, which are the kids of those parents. So remember, it's not when you were born, it's when you come of age, it's when you're a teenager or a young adult or an adult. That's when you're considered part of that generation and experiencing all the cultures that generation has to, bring and come with. So you got the original series of, The New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Now these were your parents' movies, and they were considered the best. So when they had the kids in the Generation X, the parents would say like, you got to check out this movie, son. And I'm sure you watched it with your mom or dad, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. I love Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca and, whoever character and stuff like that. But then, when you were born in the 80s or mid 80s, And then you grew up in the 90s. In 99, you had the remakes or the prequels of the Star Wars, which was episode 1, 2, and 3. And at the time when we were young kids, in 95 or whatever, 99, I mean, and then our parents at that time were looking at these movies and they were like, this is trash. So our parents were looking at the prequels and they're like, this is shit compared to the originals. But as children, we were watching this and we were like, wow, Anakin Skywalker. Wow, this is awesome. Like, remember the pod race? That's the greatest thing I ever seen. Wow, Padme, she's so hot. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi, wow. So we thought they were the greatest of all time. And then when we look back at the original Star Wars, we're like, yeah, they're cool. But that's what our grandparents or our parents, our old fart grandparents and parents were looking at. But we got the greatest franchise prequels of all times, in our generation. But then when we grew up and we're getting older, and then we have the new generation, the, millennials and Generation Z. So the older millennials, the younger millennials and then Generation Z are looking at the prequels and they're like, they stink. And we're saying now, since we're older, they stink, they're horrible. And we're like, nah, the originals were better. Our grandparents and parents were right. The original Star Wars franchise was better. And the prequels stunk. But the younger millennials are saying the prequels are good. They're not that bad. Now that they look back and they're like, yeah, they ain't that bad. We like them. And Generation Z is like, yeah, they're the greatest of all time. But now Generation Z and younger millennials have the remakes and reboots and shot-for-shot remakes of Star Wars The Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Last Jedi, and Solo. Now the Generation Z, early 20s, and young millennials, they're saying this is the greatest series generation of all time. Because to them, Generation Z and young millennials are saying Force Awakens greatest of all time. Rogue One greatest of all time. Remember the ending? The 20-second ending when what's his face? Darth Vader comes? Oh my god, and you got a CGI Leia? Oh my god, she's the best! CGI Grand Mon Tarkin? Oh my god, the greatest! And they're saying that the prequels, they're good, they're okay, but Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, Rogue One, and Solo, they're the greatest. You see what I'm saying? But the older generation of millennials, the older millennials, or predating millennials, and the older Generation X, they're saying, yo, what's with this crap? What's with the forced diversity, forced pink-haired feminists, the snowflakes, the social justice warrior characters, the super feminine, like strong woman, weak man, like killing off the weak man, portraying the men characters are stupid, irrelevant, just an obstacle in the way of the strong woman, like social justice warriors, the Me Too movement undertones. Like, that's what they're saying. That's what the older millennials and the adult Generation X are saying. But the younger millennials and Generation Z, they're saying like, yeah, we want more social justice warriors. We want more feminism. The men is stupid. Hashtag Me Too movement. We want more feminism and strong women. And, more stuff like that. They love these movies. They want more of these movies. You understand what I'm saying? Okay? So that's why when Danny McBride said, I hope we don't ruin too many childhoods, he wasn't talking about the Generation Z childhoods, the young millennial childhoods. He was talking about the older millennials, the adult Generation X. That's that's who he was talking about. Okay? So let me show you about the horror movies now. So the same thing I said applies in this case of the Halloween franchise. Take a look at it. Baby boomers, grandparents, or parents, when Halloween 1978 came out, they were like, wow, this was great. This is awesome. But then throughout, all the movies coming out, number 3, number 2, 5, Halloween Resurrection, then the Generation X, the kids, they heard it from their parents and grandparents. You got to check out Halloween. And, the kids were looking, the Generation X kids were looking at the older Halloween, and they're like, wow, that's the scariest thing I ever saw. Michael Myers, oh my God, the boogeyman with the white mask. It's so scary. But then as they became adults, they looked back at it, and they were like, yeah, they're pretty good. I still like Halloween, the original. Number 2 is really good too. But, his Resurrection was kind of crap, and H2O was, I don't know what was that. But then you had the millennials, and then you had the remakes, the Rob Zombie remakes, and that's who he was making them for. Like, the older millennials or the older Generation X, or, stuff like that. So, but then there was like a mixed bag. Some people liked the Rob Zombie remake, some people didn't. They were like, oh, it's just a remake of the original, but they still like the originals. Okay? And then Halloween 2 remake was just trash. So that just killed the franchise right there. But then now, you got Halloween 2018. And that's where the comments of Danny McBride, when he said, I hope we don't ruin too many childhoods, because this movie is not made for the older millennials. It's made for the younger millennials and the Generation Z. Okay? It's not made for the adult Generation X and younger millennials, or the older millennials, I'm sorry. It's made for the younger millennials and the Generation Z. Just take a look at what this movie is hinting at. Jamie Lee Curtis is a super feminist, and she even said, if you check out my video, she kind of spoiled the underlying meaning of this movie with the social commentary undertones of the Me Too movement, with the feminism, okay? And I even heard a non-spoiler comment review of the movie where some guys said that Halloween 2018 is basically a feminist's wet dream. And then when I heard that, I'm like, uh-oh. Okay? So that's why David Gordon Green, the director, wanted to reshoot the original, 1978 Halloween ending version to please the Generation X, or the younger millennials. So they don't get confused about what happened at the end of Halloween 1. That's why the director named the new Halloween, the same name as the original Halloween, as not to confuse the Snowflake Gen Z, Generation Z. So, you see what I'm getting at? You see the epiphany I'm having? Is it starting to make sense? So basically, Jamie Lee Curtis said that Michael Myers is the evil man who oppressed, who tormented, who gave trauma to the woman. That's who he represents. And Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode's character, is the strong feminist woman who overcomes the trauma, who says, enough is enough. I'm going to take back my narrative because I don't need the man. And apparently, some of the non-spoilers were saying that all the men in the Halloween 2018 are basically irrelevant and stupid, portrayed stupid, weak men. that are just basically an obstacle for the strong woman are just killed off because they're irrelevant and just in the way. So then I thought to myself, well, what about all the other movies that are coming out, specifically Hollywood is making for Generation Z or young millennials? They're specifically targeting that generation, and then they don't care about the older generation or the older millennials or the older adult Generation X. They're not targeting that generation. They're targeting Generation Z or younger millennials. So let me continue to show you what I'm talking about. So let's take a different franchise, the Terminator franchise. Perfect example. You had the baby boomers again, the grandparents, the parents, introduced these movies to the kids of the Generation X, and they loved it, and then they have kids, and they introduced their kids to these movies. But then you also had the reboots. You had Terminator 3, you had Terminator Salvation, which stunk. You had Terminator Genesis, which stunk. So the older millennials weren't really liking these reboots and remakes. Okay? Or some you had a mixed bag, but I guess number 3 was a mixed bag. But ultimately, Terminator Salvation stunk to them, and Terminator Genesis stunk. But then the younger millennials in Generation Z, they looked at Terminator Genesis and Salvation and Terminator 3, and they were like, wow, we like these movies. They're not that bad. They're pretty good. I like, the young Sarah Connor. I like, John Connor, how he showed up. And we like the hot, sexy model, Abercrombie and Fitch. Kyle Reese. He's sexy. So they kind of liked it. Okay? And Generation Z and younger millennials look back at Terminator Original 1 and 2, and they were like, it's okay. Yeah, they're cool and stuff. Arnold, but he's like an old fart now. Like, who cares about Arnold now? We need a young, sexy, Terminator. Why don't you bring Ryan Gosling to be the young Terminator? So that's what they're saying, okay? Ooh, Christian Bale, I don't like his Batman voice. So that's what they're saying. So they're looking, the Generation Z and younger millennials, they're looking for a new Terminator. And they're going to get a new Terminator, reboot, remake, shot for shot, whatever, in 2019. And this is the first picture that we got. And look what it is. It's the feminized Terminator with the social justice warrior, short haircut, pink feminist hair, feminist Terminator, yay! And you got the old Sarah Connor that is pushed off to the side. And you got the new Justin Bieber, whatever, feminist Terminator. And this is targeted, specifically made for Generation Z. You understand? And I'm sure John Connor is going to be a weak cuck, man who's going to be pushed out the way. And you got the new feminist, character, strong woman, going to take over and stuff like that. That's what I'm assuming, because so far everything's been like that. So if this is the generation that it's targeting, this is what that generation wants. Multiculturalism, social justice warrior, Me Too movement, all that. You already know. So I'm okay with the feminist thing, because the original Terminator 1 and 2, you had Sarah Connor, which was done great. Just like in Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, the Ripley character was done great. But now you got the feminism that is not being done great. It's done forcefully in your face, shoved down your throat, where the weak man is just a stupid character in the way, and we don't need him. And you got a Mary Sue character, which is basically a woman character who's already the strongest, smartest, fastest, doesn't need to overcome any obstacles, and is just a superhero woman. So you see what I'm saying? Let's continue. And finally, this is a broad picture of what I'm trying to say in the epiphany I had. So the new movies that are made now specifically are targeting the young millennials and the Generation Z. So what are the young millennials and Generation Z? Well, look, they're on the left. They are the safe space, pink-haired feminists, cucks, easily triggered, the soy face, the pink hat pussy, the pink pussy hats, feminists. You got the snowflakes, you can't say nothing, they easily get triggered and scream, and you got the forced multiculturalism down your throat, the forced feminism, the Mary Sue type characters where they don't have to overcome anything. You got the weakened men, the antisocial men, which are just obstacles getting in the way. You got the media, the super radical liberal agenda they're trying to push with the social commentary. And if you don't agree with them, they're going to censor you. If you don't agree with them, then you're like an atheist, a racist, an ism, a anti-woman, anti-this, anti-that. And how dare you try to, say this against whatever. Plus the hashtag #MeToo movement. So, Trigglypuff. That's what the now again, don't fall into the stereotype. This is a general broad brush. I mean, the majority, this is what they are. But you got some of the older generation spilling over into the younger generation, and they might not be this. Or 100% this. I'm not even saying they're 100% this, but they're mostly what the people, the demographic, this is the demographic that Hollywood and the media are trying to target with these movies. So look at the movies that are coming out to target this demographic. You got the new generation Rocky Creed, you got The Force Awakens, you got Rogue One, where it's just a shot-for-shot remake like Force Awakens, and the forced diversity and the social justice warrior characters and the Mary Sue characters, the feminist pink hair characters, especially with The Last Jedi, and everything is like CGI brought back from the original older movies. And that's another thing I realized in my epiphany, that for the new generation you got the remakes and reboots and shot for shot like feminized weak men versions. But for the older generation in these movies, we get callbacks, we get homages, we get like little shot for shot homages and callbacks. That's what the older generation or the older millennials are getting. So, for example, you're just gonna have like a scene in the newer 2018, Halloween or Star Wars or Aliens or Terminator or Ghostbusters, where they're gonna do a callback scene or an homage scene, or a literal shot for shot, just a different character is in that scene, like a role reversal homage. So you'll see, that's what we're getting. For the older generation, that's what we're gonna get. Because they're not targeting us. We just get a little bit to wet our palates, to be like, oh, I remember when they did that in the original. They're just doing that now, just differently. Oh, cool, thanks for the homage. Thanks for the callback. But really, they're targeting Generation Z and the young millennials with, the Ghostbusters all-feminine cast, all-girl cast, or Ocean's 8 all-girl cast, or you got the feminine Terminator cast type thing. You have the remake of Karate Kid with Jaden Smith. So, like I said, even with Terminator, the new Terminator films and the new Alien films, and David Gordon Green even said that if the new Halloween does good, he's going to do a remake of Friday the 13th. So can you imagine that with the feminist Jason and the social justice warrior, character Jason and he's gonna have like a pink haired Jason. Who knows? I'm just saying. So that's the target that these movies are trying to attract. You got, all the social commentary injected in the movies, and for the older generation that is left over, spilling into the new generation, all we get is callbacks and homages and shot-for-shot remakes. So I hope you understand, like, the epiphany I had. And I'm praying and hoping that the new Halloween is going to be good. And I'm hoping that all the new, like the Terminator movie and all that, is going to be good. But when Danny McBride said, I hope we don't ruin too many childhoods, he wasn't talking about Generation Z or the young millennials. He was talking about the older generation or the older millennials. He doesn't ruin too many of the older childhoods, not the newer childhoods. All we're going to get is callbacks and homages. But the new generation, Generation Z and the young millennials, they're going to get the shot-for-shot remakes and, pink hair feminists and, social justice warriors and all that. So, hope you get it, guys. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel. A lot more videos coming out. So until next time, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like, share this video, hit me up on Facebook and Twitter, comment down below. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. And also don't forget to check out my other videos. And until next time, remember my motto, where story comes first.